United States Navy SEALs are among the most elite and highly trained special operation forces in the entire world and are known around the globe for their daring and uh, highly secretive missions. The acronym SEAL stands for Sea, Air, and Land, reflecting their ability to operate effectively in any environment following their brutal physical and psychological training that pushes the limits of the human body. Since their official creation in the early 1960s, SEALs have engaged in unconventional warfare, counterterrorism, and special reconnaissance missions around the globe. From direct gunfights in a bunker raid to complex hostage rescues, there is no end to the list of situations their unique skill set hasn't prepared them to tackle. Of course, not all of their actions are declassified and known to the public, but there are plenty of operations that actually are. Today, we're going to go over 5 of the most unbelievable of these, showcasing just how versatile SEALs are and just how dangerous of a situation they might often find themselves in. The 1980s were an incredibly tumultuous time in the Middle East as the Iran-Iraq War raged on for nearly the full decade, making the Persian Gulf a perilous region for commercial shipping, particularly for foreign oil tankers who were often targeted by Iranian forces. In response to these threats, the U.S. initiated Operation Prime Chance, a mission aimed at protecting U.S. and Allied shipping in the Gulf, because nothing gets the attention of the U.S. like messing with their oil supplies. Navy SEALs played a pivotal role in this operation, executing daring night raids and conducting vital reconnaissance missions, usually from small boats that allowed them to operate in the waters undetected. But their shining moment came on September 21st, 1987, when they were tasked with boarding the Iran Azur, an Iranian ship that had been caught laying naval mines in the Gulf. Under the cover of darkness, SEALs silently approached the ship in inflatable boats and stealthily boarded it. Once on board, they systematically moved around the vessel, engaging enemy combatants when necessary and seizing weapons and documents. During the operation, 5 Iranian soldiers were killed, 26 were captured, along with several who were apprehended after jumping overboard once they realized who was on their ship. Among the documents and plans captured, the U.S. gained vital intelligence data on the movement of Iranian military ships, including the identity of some that were posing as merchant vessels. The following day, the ship was scuttled, marking a confident end to its mining career. The success of the mission demonstrated the SEALs' ability to operate with stealth and precision, as they had to be careful not to alert nearby enemy vessels while taking control of the Iran Azur, a task much easier said than done. Although Operation Prime Chance took place over 40 years ago, the legacy of this mission and the lessons learned are still prominent to this day. For instance, in 2023, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels began attacking international shipping in the Red Sea, with the first victim of their rocket attacks being Galaxy Leader, a Japanese cargo ship filled with automobiles. In response, the U.S. and several NATO allies initiated Operation Prosperity Guardian, during which SEAL Team 3 was deployed to seize a vessel off the coast of Somalia. It was noted by U.S. Central Command that the operation was remarkably similar to the takedown of the Iran ship, and the SEALs succeeded in capturing the ship and uncovering its cargo, which contained Iranian-made ballistic missiles. Unfortunately, this mission didn't go quite as smoothly as the original, as 2 SEALs lost their lives after one fell into the sea and another dove after him in an attempt to save his life. Due to their heavy equipment, they were unable to swim well in rough conditions and tragically died. Arguably, the most famous Navy SEAL mission of all time, Operation Neptune Spear, was the daring raid that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the September 11th attacks and who was, at the time, the leader of a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda and one of the world's most wanted men. The planning of Neptune Spear was like none other, as military intelligence had discovered that bin Laden had been hiding in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a city just a few miles from the Pakistani military academy. It was believed that he must have had connections to some powerful people in the Pakistani military, and thus, despite Pakistan technically being an ally in the war on terror, and with the mission about to take place on their soil, the U.S. couldn't risk sharing any intel. Information was mostly gathered by the CIA, who rented a home in the city and observed bin Laden's compound, gathering enough photos and information from informants to create a 3-dimensional rendering of the house, complete with the genders and heights of everyone inside. After months of reconnaissance, it was time to send in the SEALs. Because the U.S. were not at war with Pakistan, launching a military operation on their soil was going to be complex. And so, to avoid some international legal technicalities, the SEALs and anyone else involved in the mission were temporarily assigned to the control of the CIA. The mission began in eastern Afghanistan, where the SEALs flew over the border in 2 Black Hawk helicopters. It was later discovered that these helicopters were specially modified in a previously unknown manner with stealth coating and extra silent rotors to ensure entry would be under their radar. Flying low to the ground, the Black Hawks stealthily flew the entire journey without alerting the Pakistani military, arriving at Abbottabad after about 90 minutes. The original plan was to have the first helicopter hover over the courtyard while the SEALs descended on ropes, while the second would land in the northeast corner of the property. But this plan was thrown out of the window almost immediately. As the first helicopter hovered over the compound, it encountered a dangerous airflow condition known as a vortex ring, which, without getting into too much detail, made it difficult to keep the helicopter stable in the air. As the pilot struggled to stay steady, the tail smacked into one of the compound walls, forcing the pilot to make a soft crash landing. Fortunately, no occupants were harmed in the landing, and the team emerged from the helicopter ready to advance, while the second Black Hawk landed outside, and the remaining SEALs scaled the wall. Once everyone was in place, they wasted no time breaching the compound. Explosives blew open doors, walls were knocked down, and rooms were cleared one after another. SEALs were wearing night vision goggles to move through the house, which was pitch black due to the CIA cutting power to the neighborhood just minutes earlier. There are conflicting reports of what happened when they finally breached the room bin Laden was hiding in on the 3rd floor. According to some reports, there was no firefight whatsoever, but in some eyewitness testimonies, bin Laden's courier, Abu al-Kuwaiti, grabbed an AK-47 and fired at the SEALs, who returned fire. There are also conflicting reports about how or when bin Laden was killed. The traditional story was that he had peered down the staircase at the approaching SEALs and was shot several times before the door was kicked open, and he was shot again while on the floor before he could reach his weapon. However, one SEAL provides a slightly different account in which he pushed past the lead SEAL and entered the room first, finding bin Laden hiding behind a woman and using her as a human shield before he was shot in the head. However, an independent report found that most SEALs favored the first account, where he stumbled back into the room and fell to the floor. Regardless of the specifics, bin Laden had been eliminated, and the mission was a resounding success. Navy SEALs were in and out of the compound in just 38 minutes, with U.S. personnel recovering several rifles, pistols, and hundreds of electronic storage devices for later analysis, along with plenty of drugs. The helicopter that had crashed was intentionally blown up to hide its stealth technology, and a reserve chopper moved in to extract the teams. When news of bin Laden's death reached the White House Situation Room, President Barack Obama simply responded, "We got him." In 1989, the United States launched Operation Just Cause, a military intervention aimed at deposing Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, who was accused of being involved in drug trafficking, but who was also posing a threat to U.S. economic interests in the region. In the early hours of the conflict, SEAL Team 4, consisting of 48 SEALs, was deployed under the codename Operation Nifty Package, a series of high-risk objectives with the overall goal of preventing Noriega's escape and ultimately capturing him. Their first priority was disabling Noriega's private jet, which was located at Paitilla Airport in Panama City. SEALs landed south of the airport just after midnight, captured a few minor buildings on the edges of the runway to establish a temporary base of operations. But it was at this point that the SEALs received word that they weren't supposed to destroy the jet outright, but rather disable it with minimal damage. This apparently was a hot controversy after the mission because the SEALs hadn't been informed of this detail earlier, and the new orders forced them to change their plan at the last minute in order to approach the aircraft more closely than they'd expected to, in order to slash the tires or cut some critical wiring. As they moved towards the plane, they got word that armored cars were heading in their direction, at which point Panamanian soldiers stationed at the airfield opened fire, killing 2 SEALs immediately and wounding 5 more. The rest of the soldiers scattered into cover and returned fire, taking over the airport in its entirety and securing the site, but not before losing 2 more men and having 4 more wounded. The area was held until the next day as helicopters extracted the wounded, and an anti-tank weapon was fired at the jet to put it out of commission. Simultaneously, a separate SEAL team had been assigned to destroy Noriega's personal gunboat, which was tied to a pier in the Panama Canal. The plan was to approach in inflatable boats before diving under and planting explosives on the bottom of the ship, using rebreathers for added secrecy since they excrete fewer bubbles than traditional diving gear. Everything was going to plan, and the explosives were attached successfully. But while still underwater, the SEALs were suddenly spotted by Panamanian guards, who began firing and dropping grenades into the canal. The SEALs took cover under the pier and were even forced at one point to descend to 40 feet below the surface when a ship passed overhead, considered a dangerous pressure level due to the gear they were using. Regardless, the charges went off successfully, destroying the gunboat, and the SEALs were all picked up by Allied craft and returned to base. With no easy way out of the city, Noriega eventually took refuge in the Vatican Embassy. If you're wondering, the U.S. Army couldn't enter it and instead had to encircle the building and force surrender by blasting rock music for days on end. But that's a story for another day. Overall, the SEAL mission had been a success, preventing the dictator's escape. However, the operations planning was widely criticized after the fact for the poor communication regarding the disabling of his plane. Being told that they had to disable the aircraft with only minor damage was the reason many SEALs attempted to cross the runway, placing them in the open, far from cover, and leading to many of them being shot. Deaths, which ended up being in vain because the aircraft was ultimately destroyed with an anti-tank rocket. In 2009, the ship Maersk, Alabama, departed from Djibouti and was headed for Mombasa in Kenya, carrying on board 17,000 metric tons of cargo, captained by Captain Phillips. This cargo was almost entirely in the form of food aid that was being shipped to Eastern Africa from USAID, the World Food Program, and Catholic Relief Services. However, on April 8th, 240 nautical miles from the African coast, Maersk, Alabama came under attack by Somali pirates. There were 4 pirates in total, all between the ages of 15 and 18, armed with AK-47s and riding around on Windfar 161, a Taiwanese fishing vessel that they'd hijacked previously. 14 members of the crew hurried into a secure room that had been built for such an emergency, and the remaining crew on deck fired flares at the approaching pirates. But it was no use, and soon enough, the ship had been boarded. Once the pirates were on board, the captain and engineers shut down everything they could to prevent it from being driven elsewhere. And the chief engineer, Mike Perry, grabbed a knife and hid in the engine room. He would soon ambush one of the pirates and hold him hostage before attempting to trade him for the captain. But the pirates didn't honor their deal and kept her hostage after receiving their friend back. The pirates then took the captain aboard a lifeboat, intending to use him as their primary hostage. As the U.S. Navy arrived on the scene, the USS Bainbridge, a guided missile destroyer, was the first to show up and secure the Maersk, Alabama, with a tow line as soon as they could, but they didn't dare approach the lifeboat yet. It wasn't until April 12th that a resolution would be found, not in the form of a successful negotiation or a surrender, but thanks to Navy SEAL snipers. The SEALs had arrived a couple of days earlier, having parachuted into the water before climbing aboard the Navy destroyer that was towing the lifeboat. They observed the situation from the destroyer without intervening until April 12th, when the pirates announced that they were going to start the lifeboat's engine and make it to shore no matter what. Just a couple of minutes after this announcement, the SEALs made the somewhat unauthorized decision to shoot the pirates without any orders coming through proper channels. Without any prior plan or preparation, the lead SEAL ordered his men to fire, deciding that Captain Phillips' life was in immediate danger. As a pirate was pointing an AK-47 at his back, the snipers each fired off a single round, killing all 3 pirates in the lifeboat with fatal shots to the head, and leaving Captain Phillips unharmed. It was an incredible show of precision and skill from the SEALs, who made the shot at a distance of around 30 yards, while lying on the deck of a floating ship, with their targets on board another, smaller floating vessel. The 4th pirate was already on board in an American ship, as he had been injured earlier and had essentially given himself up. And so, with those 3 shots, the story of the Maersk, Alabama hijacking had come to an end. Thanks to the unbelievable talent of the SEAL snipers, not a single member of the crew received any serious harm. In 1979, the small island of Grenada was thrown into catastrophe when the People's Revolutionary Army, led by a man named Maurice Bishop, overthrew the recently elected government and announced his intention to establish a socialist regime. things got even worse when Maurice himself was overthrown and replaced by the deputy prime minister, whose political views were even more extreme than his predecessors. We mentioned earlier that disrupting oil supplies is one way to get the quick attention of the United States, but overthrowing a democratically elected government with the faint scent of communism in their backyard might be even quicker. Not to mention, as martial law descended on the islands, there were around 1,000 American medical students trapped there. With all of this in mind, the U.S. launched Operation Urgent Fury, an invasion of Grenada with the intent to secure American assets and restore democracy to the islands. Navy SEALs would be vital for the success of Operation Urgent Fury, as they would be among the first forces to sneak on the island. On October 23, 1983, SEALs parachuted down into Grenada's airport and began reconnaissance, waiting for a second team of SEALs to arrive. Unfortunately, tragedy struck in this moment as one of the planes carrying SEALs for the drop strayed off course, leaving 4 of the parachuting SEALs to land too far from the coast and drown in the sea. This reconnaissance mission quickly turned into a disaster. There was a storm at sea, making leaving the island by inflatable boat nearly impossible, especially when coupled with enemy patrols in the area. But aside from this airport reconnaissance, the SEALs had 2 other primary missions. The first was to secure the rightful head of the state, Governor General Sir Paul Scoon, and the other was to secure the island's primary radio station so that the Governor General could broadcast a message to the rest of the Caribbean that the military intervention had been requested and that other nations should intervene. 2 Black Hawk helicopters transported the team to the villa where Governor Scoon was under house arrest. 22 SEALs descended from the helicopters under heavy fire and began clearing the mansion, where they found 11 people, including the governor, hiding in the basement. As they prepared the group to be evacuated, they came under intense fire from enemy combatants, armed with AK-47s and RPGs. Once this initial threat had been dealt with, the next quickly began with 2 BTR-60 armored personnel carriers bursting to the front gate and opening fire on the house. SEALs were prepared to fire an anti-tank rocket at the lead vehicle, but the pair suddenly turned around and left. As it turned out, they'd been scared off by the American air support. The following morning, the civilians were safely evacuated by a Marine helicopter. While the situation was unfolding at the governor's mansion, 12 other SEALs were moving to secure the radio tower. They landed on the scene in a helicopter and swiftly took over the broadcast station, but soon found the radio was not exactly in working order. Setting up a perimeter, they attempted to make some quick repairs, but were suddenly under heavy fire as several armed vehicles and trucks filled with enemy soldiers began shooting at their position. The SEALs took cover and returned fire, but they were seriously outgunned and quickly running out of ammunition. Realizing that they'd need to make a quick change of plans, they instead disabled the radio tower and fled the scene, running for the water, which had been their pre-planned escape route. Running across fields and sprinting from cover to cover, the SEALs were chased with heavy fire. And just when it looked like they weren't going to make it, they cut through a chain link fence and reached the beach. After quickly wading into the water and swimming along the coastline, they found a low-hanging cliff to use as a hiding spot until the Grenadian patrol gave up their search. It took hours, but once they were confident the coast was clear, they swam out to sea and were spotted by a rescue plane. In the end, the SEALs spent 6 whole hours in the water, and 4 of them had been wounded, but not a single one died. These actions in the early hours of Operation Urgent Fury once again showcased just how adaptable Navy SEALs are, able to make the quickest of decisions in the most extreme situations and able to carry out their mission objectives despite being outnumbered or outgunned at almost every turn. Thank you so much for watching this and listening. If you're listening on podcast form, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/LarryandMelise. And we will see you in our next episode.